Hey everyone, this is our ARC 1510 demo for the Exploring Spatial Realms Through Extrusion assignment. Let's get going. So there are several different ways that we can do this, and I'm going to go through them in the order that they're presented in the assignment. But the first thing that I need to do, regardless of which method I choose, is to get my planes back. So you might recall in the demo for the last assignment where we took a little bit of extra time and we took all those planes that we made and then split and we put them on the XY, XZ, and YZ layers for those planes. So let's go back through and turn them back on. Make ourselves a fresh set of layers so we can stay organized. Let's go down here and say XY borders. Go down here, the XZ borders, and then go down here and say YZ borders. Now, you don't actually need to put these in the same order. You can just throw them at the end if you like, but I like to keep them in order just to help myself stay organized. Now what we want to do is go back through and extract the silhouettes of each of these planes that we've cut sections through. So there are three different tools that we can use to do this in one step, and there are probably more than that, to be honest, but I want to explain what all of them are, why they're different, and why they all do the same thing in this instance. So the first tool is extract wireframe, which is a command that we are familiar with from our last assignment. So in order to demonstrate this, I'm going to draw kind of an abstract shape with a hole in it, right? And this is 2D right now, but if I take it and then I extrude this curve, make it 3D, and then select it and run the command extract wireframe, then I'm going to get all of the borders of this object in 3D. Which is cool. But if I just want the silhouette of a face, then what I can do is I can go through and delete all of this stuff. And I've got the silhouette there, and then I can make this a planar surface using the planar surface. And then that'll give me that curvature. The other thing that I can do here is if I just want the geometry of the outside of the object, I can use the command silhouette. And that gives me just the geometry of the outside of the object, which is pretty cool. The other thing that I can do is I can use the command duplicate border. And I can select just the face and say duplicate border. And then I can get the geometry of just that face because it duplicated all the borders of the face. So those will all give you the same results when you run them on your planes, and that's because the planes that you have are two-dimensional, so there's no other borders to duplicate. But those are all three different commands that you can use to capture boundary geometry that are all really useful, and they do different things depending on whether or not your object is 2D or 3D and how much information you want to get. So in order to do the next part of the assignment, I want to capture the geometry of all of these planes that we cut sections through. Now we did this a little bit in the last assignment using the extract wireframe command, which we could use again, but we want to be a little bit more surgical in our approach this time. So we're going to do it one set at a time. So let's go ahead and make our lives a little bit easier and turn off any of the sets that we're not going to use. And let's start by hopping over to the XZ layer and turning off our YZ and XZ planes layers. Now we're going to use that silhouette command to capture the geometry of all of these planes and dump them on our XY borders layer. We can do that either after the fact, or we can go ahead and activate the XY borders layer now. Select all this stuff, say silhouette, and it's going to go ahead and dump it on the correct layer. So let's go ahead and let's turn off our XY planes layer and see what we got. That looks pretty good. Though I've got these weird little ISO curves in here that I can go through and delete because I'm not going to need those. They did look good in the last assignment for the axon drawing, but I don't want them this time around. Okay, cool. Now let's go ahead and we want to make sure that we keep all of these things constrained relative to one another, at least for now. that'll make our lives a little bit easier. So, and what I mean by this is if I do something like I grab, okay, so the other thing that we want to do, because right now these are all loose lines, let's go ahead, take these, join them, so that now we don't have a bunch of loose lines hanging around, and we can at least keep these things constrained relative to each other and have these be continuous curves where they're supposed to be continuous. Now what we want to do is make sure that if we accidentally grab, just the border, then we don't lose that relationship either. And we can tweak that later, and we can actually break that rule later on in the assignment. But for now, just to make sure everything stays organized, let's go through, and then whenever we've got more than one geometry on a plane, let's just group it. This is an especially useful technique when you're doing laser cut files and you have all these nested geometries if you're going to be lining them up later on your cut sheets, which isn't a problem right now, but later on it will be essential when you're setting up files for laser cutters. So now what I do, if I grab this, then this is all going to be constrained relative to the other geometries on that plane. Okay, so let's just repeat that process for the other sets of planes. So we can go ahead and activate our XZ and XY borders layers. Let's make the XY borders the current layer. Then when I select this and I say silhouette, it's going to dump that on the XZ borders layer, which is what I want. So let's inspect it, turn off the XZ planes. All that stuff looks pretty good to me. Let's go ahead and join it and group it. Looks good. Let's repeat the process one more time. Go ahead, activate XY and your, YZ and your YZ borders. Make your YZ borders the current layer. That way when you do your silhouette command, it'll go ahead and it'll dump all those curves on the correct layer. Turn off the plane, inspect the curves. Those look good. Join them, group them. And now we've got a nice organized system of curves that we can lay out for the next part of the assignment. All right, so let's lay all these out so we can go ahead and start building our wall. The first thing that I want to do here is I'm going to go ahead and just make copies of all of this stuff. Copy, paste, because I don't like to mess with my originals too much. Let's go ahead and get these over here, and these you'll notice will have retained their original layers. So if I turn them off here, then all those properties stay the same, which is kind of nice. So now I'm going to do what I did with my contours, and I'm going to just start laying these out in a way where I can get them all in the same place to do the first part of the assignment, which is to stack all of these things on top of each other. So let's go ahead and let's get these things adjusted. So now these are all on the control plane and in the same orientation and will be much easier to work with. Since in this tutorial we're going to show 3 different ways to do this assignment, I'm going to go ahead and make 3 copies of all this stuff and put them on 3 different layers. So let's go down here and make 3 new layers. Let's say this is method 1, method 2, and method 3. I'm going to copy and paste all this stuff, make 3 sets, copy paste. And I'm going to put all of these guys on my method 1 layer, all of these on my method 2 layer, and all of these on my method 3 layer. Missed a spot. There we go. And this will make this tutorial be a little bit more organized. So the first thing that I'm going to do is turn all this other old stuff off because I don't need it anymore and I don't want to mess it up. And I'm going to go ahead and activate one of these other layers and turn the last little bit of that off. Okay, that looks good. So in this assignment, at least in its current iteration, the wall that you have to build needs to be between 4 and 16 feet tall and at least 4 feet long. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and scale all of this stuff so that I'm at least working at the right scale. Because if I go ahead and I measure this, let's use the command distance, and I take a look at what this bounding box was, I can see at the bottom of my screen that it is, just a little bit over 16 inches tall. So we're at completely the wrong scale. So let's go ahead and scale all this stuff so that we're working at the scale that this assignment demands. The way that I'm going to do this is I'm going to decide for myself, well, maybe I want this tall thing to be 16 feet tall, and then I'll just work backwards from there, which is a very easy way to do this. So let's go ahead and draw a line and make the base point the bottom of this. Go to the top plane and say, I want this line to be 16 feet long, which you'll notice is this long. I'm going to hold Shift to keep this line straight, finish it, finish the command. Good. That looks great. Now what I'm going to do is select everything and then unselect the line and then scale it. My base point is going to be the bottom of this. Remember, because this line goes all the way to the bottom. If I tickle it here, I can see it light up. So they both share the same starting point. This is going to be my base point, my first scale factor point. I'm going to drag it to the end of that line. Now I can delete that curve that's left over there, and I'm working at the correct scale now. Great. The first way that you can approach this assignment is to reinterpret the overlaid figure ground diagrams as a wall with a relief. So what does that mean? Well, a relief is like a kind of art form where you've got basically a canvas or even a wall where something is being apparently extruded from or into that canvas or wall. So it's like a three-dimensional, painting or carving, and we're going to make that with this. So what we need to do here is draw our canvas or our wall. Let's go ahead and do this in the top plane. Let's go ahead and make a box. Start at that corner. Let's just get started here. Let's snap to this guy, and I think maybe about that aspect ratio looks pretty good to me. Okay, let's go ahead and turn off method 2 and 3 and get all this stuff out of our way. So now what I'm going to do is I've got my wall. I'm going to make it a wall. Extrude curve, maybe start with 6 inches. Sure. Now what I'm going to do is start moving my other stuff onto this canvas or a wall. Let's take this and maybe we'll move him, I don't know, here. It doesn't really matter where you put this stuff. You can kind of do this however you want at this point. This is kind of like reimagining the assignment where you took all of the geometries from your orthographic boards and reimagined them as sections. We're kind of doing something similar here. So it doesn't really matter where you put these, and I'm just going to throw them all over the place because I'm just trying to get through the tutorial here. And then, maybe I want to copy and paste some of these. Maybe I want to take some of these and scale them up or break them into different geometries. Maybe I want to rotate them. Maybe I want them to be a little bit bigger. Maybe I want to isolate some of these geometries. So the other thing that I can do here is the thing that made these so easy to work with when I grouped them is going to make it a little bit harder to work with them now. So I might want to ungroup them. Maybe I want to grab just this guy, copy it, paste it, move it around, copy, paste it. Maybe I want to scale him up a little bit. So, and throw all this stuff down there. Let's go ahead and take this group, ungroup it, and then I can just start extruding stuff out of the wall. So if I take this and say extrude curve, maybe I want to extrude this, I don't know, a foot. That's kind of cool. Maybe I want to delete part of this, and that's a kind of a cool looking wall. Grab this group, ungroup it, or I don't know, don't ungroup it and just try to extrude that. Extrude that maybe a foot. Also cool. Delete what you don't want. Sure. Ungroup. and so forth and so on. And, just fill your whole wall with all sorts of these shapes. This is a little bit sparse for the assignment, but, we're only, a couple of minutes into this wall. So fill it up, make it rich, make it cool. You can also do things like break up these shapes into other sub-shapes. Like if I were to do something like, I don't know, maybe split this curve with this curve, and then split that curve with that curve, and then join these together and make shapes that way, then sure, go for it. So if we turn all this stuff off and activate method 2, then let's look at another way to do this. Maybe what we want to do instead is to work on this in the top plane. And I'm going to just rotate this to make it a little bit easier to think about. Or don't. I mean, rotate it, do it this way. That's fine too. As long as we end up with something that's the right size and interesting, then that's really probably fine. So let's go ahead, and we know this thing is 16 feet long already. Let's go ahead and start using method 2, which is to, instead of having these be a relief that's coming out of a wall, then we're just going to turn all of these into an elevation by combining them. So maybe we can move these and join them, or not even join them, just to stick them next to each other, and just start extruding these geometries right next to each other as an elevation. So let's do 6 inches. Let's start there. Inches. Maybe I want to get rid of this. And then maybe I want to take some of these. Maybe I want to extrude these a little bit differently. Maybe I want to ungroup them, extrude them as a hollow circle. And then maybe I want to take this, move this, stick this over here, ungroup it, maybe this is going to be 2 feet. And then I can just keep going through and building my wall this way. Maybe I want to take a couple of these geometries, copy, paste them, move them from, I don't know, from there to there. Oh, wrong spot. There to there. Maybe I want to just kind of mirror some of this stuff. And I can go through and I can build and keep building stuff until I get a wall that's the right shape or the right size. Another way that you could think about this is to think about it through sections. And I'm going to do this here in method 3. And to make my life a little bit, I don't know whether it's easier, but I think it's easier to think about it this way, or at least to present it this way, is I'm going to flip this up as if it's already standing up. And then I'm going to take some of this stuff, I'm going to ungroup it, and then maybe I want to extrude it. And I'm going to extrude it like, I don't know, 8 feet. And maybe I'll take some of these bits here and I'll move it. So I start getting a longer wall. It's got a really interesting cross section. Maybe I want to delete this. And then I can take some of these other things and extrude it this way, like, I don't know, 3 feet. Then maybe this time around, I'll delete this one and then grab some of these move him there. Ungroup these. Extrude them. Maybe I want to create my wall sectionally this way, and then I want to go add some, maybe a little bit of interest here, some finer details. Let's go here. Yeah, I'll drop this guy right there. Make sure I'm actually on the wall there. Ungroup. Curve. I can go through here and I can add all sorts of interesting features to this wall and build it in this way instead as sections. All right, so after you do all that, you're going to end up with some kind of a wall. So let me take you on a little tour of this one so we can get a sense of what's going on here. We've got a lot of different planar things happening. We've got some places to sit. I've got some little bump outs here. We've got kind of a flat back there. Maybe some little bits that stick out, some recesses for some cubbies, maybe another little spot for a bench, and another little place to climb up on it and sit up here. So that's why we've got so many different pushes and pulls and reliefs. So what we need to do is we need to make a plan and a section and an elevation that shows us how this wall works and documents it in 3 dimensions. So let's start with an elevation. To do this, go ahead and grab a view that looks straight on at your wall in the view that you want to grab the elevation from. So probably from there. Now I know that the way that I built my wall, if I hit the front view, I'm going to get that. So let's go there. Now all you need to do is grab everything and make a make 2D. It's going to stick it on the top view. Okay, that looks pretty good. And by pretty good, I mean, I think that the make 2D worked, and it's showing all the lines that I want to see. But let's think about it for a second, and whether or not I want to actually see all these lines. So when we show an elevation, we really need to show where surface edges are, which means we need to show surface boundaries, holes in the walls, or if there's an edge because I've kind of pushed or pulled the surface and created some kind of recess or relief or some kind of extrusion, then I'll see all those edges. But some of these edges are just there because I made the things in 2 different pieces in Rhino, and I need to figure out whether or not I want to show them that way. So, for example, if I look at my perspective view, I need to decide if this and this are actually 2 separate pieces in my wall, or if it just looks that way because I made them as 2 separate pieces in Rhino. Now, if you're going to have them be 2 separate pieces in your wall, great. Otherwise, you can go ahead and delete those lines that you don't actually want to show as being different pieces. So if I take this, and remember, when you do a make 2D, everything comes in as grouped. So if I ungroup these, then I can delete this line, and now it looks like that's all one big piece. So you need to decide whether or not it is or it isn't, but this is a really convenient time to edit out some of that line work. Now you can also fix this later when you do your elevations in AutoCAD. Now the next thing that I'd like to do is go ahead and get these lines off of the Make 2D layer and onto an elevation layer so I can keep them organized. So let's go down to our layers, make a new layer, call it something like elevation, line work. Sorry, I can't type because I'm working in my garage and it's very cold outside right now. Okay, now we can just take all that line work we just made, dump it on the elevation line work layer. Now another thing that you can do, and I'll go ahead and mention it now, is if you want to go ahead and organize your lines by things that are edges or things that are in the foreground or things that are in the background so that you can adjust those line weights later, you can do that now by making different layers for example, elevation edges, elevation foreground, elevation background, and sorting through those lines here in Rhino before you export. That could save you some time later. We're not going to do that now, but because you guys already know how to organize some of these things onto layers from our last tutorial, but that's something you might want to think about if you want to save some time later. Now let's get on with the process of cutting a section, which we also mostly know how to do. So let's go ahead and let's take that Make 2D line work and let's just go ahead and delete that layer because we don't need that anymore. That was the Make 2D layer we deleted, not the elevation line work. We have the elevation line work on the elevation line work layer. Let's turn it off. Let's go back to a perspective view. And now what we want to do is this uncut wall. Well, first of all, go ahead and make a backup of it. I already did it in my wall backup layer, but I'm just going to go ahead and copy this, paste it, and I'm just going to call this, I don't know, uncut wall. And I'm going to move it to the uncut wall layer, right? So the reason I want to do that, and I'm going to put that above here just for convenience sake, is because what I'm going to do now to cut this and to make a section is I need to cut my wall and do a Boolean split. But I don't want to cut the only wall I have because I'm going to have to cut it again later to do my plan drawing. And I also, if I need to go back and fix this later or I want to save this, I don't want the only copy of this file to have the cut wall in it. I want to save the original. So with that on the uncut wall layer, I can turn that off, right? And I can make myself a new layer called section wall. This is going to be my section wall, right? So let's go ahead, switch it to that layer. And just to test these, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn all these off. Let's just grab one of these, I don't know, maybe like the old wireframe layer that's hanging out in this file. And let's turn both of these off. There it is, the old line work. And let's turn on our section wall and make sure there's a wall on there. And let's turn on our uncut wall layer, make sure there's an uncut wall on there. So we're good. You should always test this stuff. Okay, back to the section wall layer. Now we can cut this with confidence knowing that we're not going to ruin the only wall that we have. So now we need to pick a good spot to find a section, or to cut a section through. And I want to cut my section so that I'm going to be cutting it through that way. As in, I'm going to cut it with a plane that goes that way so I'm looking that way. To pick a good spot, let's go ahead and use a clipping plane to get a preview. I need to turn this, adjust my selection filter slightly so I can select my clipping plane. It always seems to guess the wrong direction. I think this looks like a good spot to cut a section, right around here. So I'll remember that. A couple of ways that I can make this section cut. First of all, I know that I want to make this, or to have this view be looking from the left, right? So I want to be, if I look at the top of the model, I want to be looking at it coming from here and going toward that direction. So what I can do is use one of my viewports up here, none of which are particularly helpful. So for example, if I click on my right, that's not really what I want, but maybe I can change my right one to view, set view, left. So this is more, looks like more in the right direction, but I'm still not seeing that clipping plane active. So all I need to do is, with the clipping plane selected, activate it in the left viewport. And now I can see that section and how it looks. It's a little bit less confusing if I change this from ghosted to shaded. I can start seeing how this wall is working. Now with the clipping plane active, we can actually go ahead and just cut a section using only the clipping plane without actually splitting our model. And that we can just simply do that by highlighting everything and using the make 2D command again with the clipping plane active. Checking the top view. Looks pretty good. We're getting all our tangent edges there that we'll have to clean up later, which is pretty gross. So I think that I would rather just go ahead and split the model. So we can kind of see where the clipping plane is. What I'm going to do is draw a line, go back to my perspective view. I can go ahead and delete this clipping plane. Select everything, but not that. Do my Boolean split. Use this guy to cut. And I've got a couple things that I probably need. Oh, no, you're okay. So I can go through. I've got a couple of curves left over that I don't want in there. And delete this stuff. Delete this stuff. There's my section. And I don't need to really worry about the fact that I've cut this model already because I saved a backup of it. So let's go back to the left view. Make 2D. Go back to the top. And there we go. So it looks a little bit better, but it's still pretty hard to read. So what I need to do now is I need to go back and figure out which of these edges that I want to show, which I want to hide, which are clipping plane intersections, and how I want to poche this thing. So this could take a little bit of time. You're probably going to have to bounce back and forth between this view and the left view and the perspective view to figure out which of these edges you want to show. And now you also might have an object that's easier to work with because mine has a lot of these little sharp, small radii that end up in all of these little tangent edges in the Make 2D. Now, if you're getting Make 2D results that are less than desirable, another thing that you can try to do is, if I delete this, let's go back to our left view. Let's go to our File, Settings. In your tolerances, make sure you've got a lot of zeros. This is probably more zeros than you need. Another way that you can make this process a little bit more painless is to remember that Make 2D groups the output by default. So as long as you have that option checked, then this object becomes a little bit easier to read if you go through and you click on the individual pieces, because you can start to see what is an edge and what isn't. So for example, I know that this thing here is cut and it's in the forefront, right? So if I go back to my top view, I can see that this stuff is all grouped together and I'm getting that same edge. And then this, I also know, is even with that, right? Because if I bounce back between this view and my perspective view, I know that all of these things were cut at one time in one place. So then maybe what I might want to do is to go through and make a new layer and say this, a layer for stuff that's in the front. Then I can go through for objects that, again, they're all grouped together, objects that are further beyond, label them in groups by what they are. So that way when I export all this stuff into AutoCAD, then I can have all of these lines organized by groups that I can, or by layers that I can turn on and off. And then I can adjust things like, or I can organize them into layers by what lines I want to be heavier and what lines I want to be lighter, because some of the stuff is just tangent edges and some of these things are actual boundaries. So for example, maybe what I can do is make a layer called Section Piece 1 and move this stuff to that layer. And then I'll just go ahead and turn it off just to keep track of what I've done so far. Section Piece 2. Turn it off. Section Piece 3. And so forth. Okay, so now I think I've got everything, and I can test that by simply hiding this, turning all of these layers back on, and making sure that it looks like I've got everything. And then if I show it and anything else appears, then I screwed up. But I didn't, so I can just go ahead and turn these layers back off, delete these junk curves, which were probably just curves that I had left in the model when I did the Make 2D. And then that's all my section stuff organized by piece, and I can tidy that up later when I fix my line work in AutoCAD or Illustrator. All right, now let's make a plan. So we're back to our cut section model. We don't need that anymore. Let's go ahead and make a new layer called Plan Wall. And we're going to go ahead and activate or make that our current layer, turn off the section wall, and that old Make 2D layer, we can go ahead and delete it because we're going to make a new one and we don't want all these redundant layers. Okay, cool. So let's go back to our uncut wall, turn it on, copy it, Control copy, Control paste, move that to our plan wall, and then turn off the old uncut wall layer. Again, let's go ahead and test it again by turning on or activating one of these old layers, deactivating the plan wall, making sure that our uncut wall is intact, which it is, turning the plan wall back on, hop over here, turn that thing off again, because now we know that we're safe to do whatever we want to this plan wall, and we've still got that leftover old uncut wall. So when you make a plan view, it's a lot like making a section view, except for in a section view, where usually we're cutting it, I don't know, like in our last one down there from the top, in a plan view, we're cutting it this way. Now, for this assignment, and as is typical, we usually cut the plan view of a building at about 3'6". So that's what we're going to do for this thing too. Now, the difference between a plan view and a section view is that, well, there's the direction, but also in a plan view, we want to dash in stuff that's overhead. So we need to do this just a little bit differently and take one extra step. So as we did with our section view, we're going to make a plane and make a cutting tool and cut our model. So let's go ahead and make this plane, grab it on the bottom, go to the top view, make sure we're flat. That's cool. Move this around a little bit. Okay, layer surface. I know that I started at the bottom of the model. Let's move this up 42 inches or 3'6". And now we're going to cut everything. So let's go ahead and get this guy, select everything except for the plane, Boolean split. This is our cutting tool. There we go. Now it looks like something didn't cut properly, but I bet it's just because I have some junk curves in here. So let's go ahead and go to Edit, select Objects, Curves. There they are. Now if I go ahead and reselect this stuff, it looks like everything cut nicely. Great. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make, instead of deleting it, so now what I need to do, instead of just deleting it, because I need both parts this time, I'm going to make my life easier by making two separate layers, one for the top stuff and one for the bottom stuff. So let's go ahead and start with our current layer, which is plan wall. And let's just change this to plan wall lower. Let's make a new layer called plan wall upper. And I'm going to move these so they're next to each other. Again, it doesn't really matter, but I just like that. And then we'll take all this stuff that we just made, and we're going to move it to the plan wall upper layer. We don't need this plane anymore. We can turn this off to test it. That all looks good. Great. So now we need to make our plan views. This step is a lot like making a section view. So we're going to go ahead and turn off the plan wall upper. We're going to go to the top view, but we're going to try to make our lives a little bit easier by going ahead and making a saved view, top for plan. And now when I move this around, I can recall it. And the reason that we're going to do this with this view is because we're going to cut another section, or we're going to do another set of line work that should match up with this, and this way it will when we do our Make 2D. So let's go ahead, grab this stuff, make 2D, apply. You can see to dump this on the top here, right? So I'm not going to move it, but what I am going to do is go ahead and create a new layer called Plan Line Work Bottom, or something like that. Because what this is kind of our floor plan, right? So we're cutting through the wall. This is the stuff beyond. The floor is kind of down there. Now I need to go ahead and show the stuff that's overhanging. So I'm going to move this stuff to our Plan Line Work Bottom layer that we just made, and I'm going to turn it off. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the perspective view so we can get a good sense of what we're doing. We don't really need this anymore. In fact, we shouldn't have it anymore. So we're going to turn this off. We're going to activate the Plan Wall Upper layer, turn off the Plan Wall Lower layer. We're going to go back to that save view that we had, that top for plan view, except now the upper stuff is active and the lower stuff is not. So I can do make 2D. And then what I can do is go ahead and make myself Plan Line Work Top. I didn't spell that right at all, but that's okay. It's late and my fingers are very, very cold. So what you'll notice now though is if I go to my layers and I turn my Plan Line Work Bottom on, everything lines up properly. So let's take a second and make that and move that line work that we just made to the Plan Line Work Top layer. We can do that by using the select last command because it was the last thing we made. And then this make 2D is now empty. We can just delete it. If it gives us a warning saying that something is still on it, then we know we did something wrong. And now we can go through and start exporting. So we can do this a couple of different ways, but I'm going to do it all in one step. So we've already got our two Plan Line Work layers on. So let's go ahead and turn on the other layers that we want to export. So now these are on. I'm going to move these just so they look nice and I feel organized. So now all of our section pieces are activated. Let's go to our our elevation line work. It's overlapping, no problem. We can still easily select it by selecting the objects on that layer. I'm going to move these so they look nice and tidy. And there we go. So now all of these are organized onto layers. So when I select these and go to File, Export Selected, and I export it for either AutoCAD or for Illustrator, then it should preserve all these layers. So for this assignment, since we're doing the AutoCAD option, then I can just export it as a DWG. Export. And that should be that. Okay, so in AutoCAD we have a blank screen, but if we zoom out for a while, there we go. There's our line work. You'll also notice that all of those layers that we made are still in place.